The heat in Ocaso, Arizona, was a physical presence. It pressed down from a bleached-out sky and radiated up from the cracked asphalt, a constant, suffocating weight. Jack Reacher felt it soak through his shirt as he stepped off the bus. The town was little more than a smudge on the map, a place you passed through on the way to somewhere else. For Reacher, who was on his way to nowhere in particular, it was as good a place as any to stop. He had no luggage, just the clothes he stood in and a folding toothbrush in his pocket. He walked down the town's only main street, a collection of single-story buildings with faded paint and sun-bleached signs. A diner, a hardware store, a boarded-up movie theater, and a sheriff's office. It was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that wasn't peaceful but expectant. Reacher's internal clock, honed by years in the military police, picked up on the anomalies immediately. The cars parked along the street were clean, late-model sedans and SUVs, out of place in a town that looked like it ran on 20-year-old pickup trucks. Then there were the men. He saw 3 of them in the space of a block. They weren't locals. They were fit, moved with a coiled efficiency, and had the watchful eyes of men who were paid to notice things. Their haircuts were military, their clothes civilian but practical, cargo pants, sturdy boots, shirts that didn't conceal the bulk of their shoulders and chests. One of them, leaning against a storefront, had a telltale bulge under his left arm. Another, exiting the diner, had a radio earpiece snaking up to his ear. They were professionals, security contractors, mercenaries, and there were far too many of them for a town the size of Ocaso. Reacher's curiosity, a trait that had gotten him into more trouble than any other, was piqued. He walked into the diner. The air conditioning was a welcome shock. A waitress with tired eyes and a name tag that read Maria gestured for him to sit anywhere. He took a booth by the window, giving him a clear view of the street. "Just coffee," he said when she came over. She nodded, pouring the dark liquid into a thick ceramic mug. "Passing through?" she asked, her voice flat. "Something like that." She didn't press. She'd probably seen 100 men like him, drifters carried in on the desert wind, but as she turned to leave, her eyes flickered towards the 2 men sitting at the counter, the same type as the ones outside. They weren't talking, just staring into their mugs, but their posture was alert, their attention seemingly fixed on the entire room at once. Reacher drank his coffee slowly, letting the rhythm of the place settle over him. It was a rhythm of fear. The other patrons, a few old-timers, a young couple, kept their voices low and their eyes down. Maria moved with a forced, brittle efficiency, avoiding any interaction with the 2 men at the counter. The town wasn't just quiet, it was suppressed. He paid for his coffee and left, stepping back into the oppressive heat. He decided to walk the perimeter of the town. It didn't take long. Ocaso was hemmed in by the vast, unforgiving Sonoran desert on all sides. On the town's eastern edge, where the last of the houses gave way to scrub and rock, he found what the mercenaries were guarding. A high chain-link fence, topped with razor wire, enclosed a large windowless concrete building. It was new, the concrete still pale against the red desert dust. There were no signs, no company logos. A single steel gate, manned by 2 guards in a small booth, was the only way in or out. More men patrolled the perimeter. They were armed openly here, carrying short-barreled carbines. This was the hub, the reason for the occupation. Reacher watched from a distance, using the shimmering heat haze for cover. It was a formidable setup, far too sophisticated for a simple warehouse. It screamed secrecy, and secrecy on this scale usually meant big money and bad things. He had seen enough. This wasn't his problem. His plan was to walk to the edge of town and stick out his thumb, catch a ride to the next place, and leave Ocaso and its silent fear behind. He was cutting through an alleyway back towards the main street when a side door to a small grocery store burst open. A young man stumbled out, followed by 2 of the mercenaries. One of them shoved him hard against the brick wall. "We told you to stay away from the fence, kid," the mercenary growled. He was big, with a shaved head and a tattoo of a scorpion on his neck. "I wasn't doing anything," the young man stammered, his face pale with fear. "I was just looking for my dog." "Your dog?" the second mercenary sneered. "That's a new one. Let's see what you were really doing." He began roughly patting the kid down. Reacher could have kept walking. He should have kept walking. But he had a deeply ingrained, almost pathological intolerance for bullies. Two trained professionals tormenting a scared kid in a dark alley. The math was wrong. He stepped out from behind the dumpster where he had paused. "Let him go," Reacher said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the tension like a razor. The two mercenaries turned, their eyes narrowing as they took in Reacher's size. At 6'5", with a chest like a barrel and hands like dinner plates, he was not an easy man to dismiss. "This doesn't concern you, friend," Scorpion Neck said, his hand drifting towards the pistol on his hip. "Walk away." "I'm not your friend," Reacher replied, his eyes locked on the mercenary. "And I've got a problem with the odds. 2 against 1 seems unfair. How about 1 against 1? He didn't wait for an answer. He moved, covering the 10 feet between them in 2 long strides. Scorpion Neck was fast, his hand reaching for his weapon, but Reacher was faster. He didn't go for the gun. He went for the man. He drove the heel of his palm up under the man's nose, a short, brutal jab that sent a starburst of pain through the man's skull and snapped his head back into the brick wall with a sickening crack. The mercenary crumpled to the ground, unconscious. The second man was already drawing his weapon, but he was too slow, too focused on the pistol. Reacher's left hand shot out, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it savagely. Bones snapped. The man screamed, the gun clattering to the pavement. Reacher didn't stop. He spun the man around, wrapping an arm around his throat, and squeezed. The man struggled for a few seconds, his feet kicking frantically, before going limp. Reacher let him drop. The entire encounter had taken less than 5 seconds. He turned to the young man, who was staring, wide-eyed and terrified. "Go," Reacher said, "and stay away from the fence." The kid didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled to his feet and ran. Reacher looked down at the 2 unconscious men. He had just declared war. He hadn't planned to, but plans had a way of evaporating around him. He knew they'd have radios, IDs. Their friends would be here soon. He picked up the discarded pistol, checked the magazine, and tucked it into the back of his waistband. Then he melted back into the shadows of the alley. His intention to leave Ocaso had just been canceled. Now, he had to know what was in that building. He found a room in a dilapidated motel at the edge of town, paying cash to a clerk who didn't seem to care about anything at all. From his window, he watched the town change. As dusk fell, the mercenary presence grew. SUVs cruised the streets in pairs. Men with rifles took up positions on rooftops. They weren't just guarding the concrete fortress anymore. They were hunting. They were looking for him. Reacher understood their mindset. They were a professional unit, and he had embarrassed them. He had taken down 2 of their own with contemptuous ease. It was an insult to their pride and a threat to their security. They wouldn't rest until he was captured or dead. They assumed he was trapped in the small town, a rat in a maze of their own design. They were wrong. For Reacher, the town wasn't a trap. It was a weapon. His first move was to gather intelligence. He slipped out of his motel room after midnight, a ghost in the moonless dark. He moved through backyards and alleyways, his large frame surprisingly silent. He watched them, studying their patrol patterns, their communication methods, the number of men. He counted at least 30, operating with military precision. They were good, but they were predictable. They relied on their numbers and their technology. Reacher relied on himself. He needed an ally, someone on the inside. He thought of the waitress, Maria. He had seen more than just exhaustion in her eyes. He had seen anger. The next morning, he went back to the diner. He sat in the same booth. The atmosphere was even more tense than the day before. The mercenaries who came in for coffee were grim-faced and jumpy. They knew he was still out there. When Maria came to his table, he spoke quietly. "What do you know about the facility at the edge of town?" She stiffened, her eyes darting around nervously. "I don't know anything," she whispered, her voice tight. "Please don't cause trouble." "They're already trouble," Reacher said. "I saw them with a young man in an alley yesterday. What's his name? Her face paled. Leo. He's my nephew. Is he? He's fine. I persuaded them to let him go. A flicker of something, gratitude maybe, crossed her face before being replaced by fear. They'll kill you, she said. These men. They run this town. The sheriff, the mayor. They're all paid off or scared silent. They've been here for 6 months. My brother, Leo's father, he used to ask questions. He was a reporter for the local paper. He disappeared 3 months ago. Now Reacher understood. This wasn't just a job for her. It was personal. What were they building? He asked. Nobody knows for sure, she said, her voice barely audible. They brought in their own crews, their own materials. We just hear the trucks at night. They're protecting something valuable. She leaned in closer. My brother thought it had something to do with a company called Etheria Solutions, a tech firm. He said they were into data, secure data. Etheria Solutions. The name meant nothing to Reacher, but it was a start. Thank you, Maria, he said. Stay safe. He left the diner with a new piece of the puzzle, a high-security data fortress in the middle of nowhere. It could be anything. Corporate secrets, government black site, a server farm for the dark web. Whatever it was, the people behind it were willing to kill to protect it. That night, the mercenaries changed their tactics. Instead of patrols, they set up ambushes. They knew he was methodical, that he would be studying them. They used his own intelligence against him. Reacher was moving down a darkened street, planning to disable one of their rooftop lookouts when he sensed the shift. A shadow that wasn't quite right. The glint of metal where there should be none. He froze behind a large cactus. 2 men were positioned in a recessed doorway across the street. Another was on the roof opposite his target. A classic L-shaped ambush. They were waiting for him to make his move on the lookout, and then they would have him pinned in a crossfire. Reacher smiled grimly in the dark. They were learning, but they still didn't understand who they were dealing with. They thought they were the hunters. He didn't retreat. He advanced. He slipped back the way he came, circling the block with silent, deliberate speed. He came up behind the building where the 2 men were hiding in the doorway. A rusty fire escape led to the roof. He scaled it without a sound, his large body moving with the grace of a predator. From the roof, he could see the entire setup. The 2 men in the doorway below, the single sniper on the opposite roof, and his original target, the lookout, all focused on the empty space where they thought he would appear. He dealt with the sniper first. He crossed the rooftop, his soft-soled shoes making no noise on the gravel. The sniper was using night vision goggles, scanning the street below, his rifle resting on a low parapet. He never heard Reacher approach. A single powerful arm wrapped around his neck, cutting off his air and his consciousness in the same instant. Reacher laid him down gently, taking his rifle, a suppressed, high-caliber bolt action, and his radio. He listened to the radio for a moment. Static, then a calm voice. Alpha Team, any contact? Negative, Command, one of the men in the doorway below responded. Viper is quiet, all clear. Reacher keyed the sniper's radio. Command, this is Viper. I have movement. West side of the street, approaching the target building. He used a low, clipped tone, mimicking the professional cadence he'd heard. Copy, Viper. All teams, hold your fire until he's in the kill zone. Reacher looked across at the original lookout. The man tensed, peering intently into the darkness where Reacher had supposedly been spotted. Then, he looked at the 2 men in the doorway below. They shifted their positions, gripping their weapons, their bodies tight with anticipation. They were all focused on the Phantom. Reacher raised the sniper rifle. He wasn't a sniper by trade, but he was a master of every weapon he picked up. He centered the crosshairs, not on a man, but on the large electrical transformer on a pole just behind the 2 men in the doorway. He squeezed the trigger. The suppressed rifle coughed. A heavy slug slammed into the transformer. There was a loud bang, a shower of blue sparks, and the entire block was plunged into absolute darkness. Panic erupted over the radio. "What was that? What happened? Lights are out. I can't see anything. Viper, report. What was your shot?" Reacher didn't answer. He was already moving. He dropped the rifle and swung down the fire escape, landing as silently as a cat. In the ensuing confusion, with the mercenary's night vision temporarily blown out by the bright flash, he crossed the street. The two men were fumbling in the doorway, momentarily blinded and disoriented. Reacher hit them like a freight train. He drove his shoulder into the first man, sending him flying into the wall. He delivered a series of rapid-fire hammer fists to the second man's head and torso, dropping him before he could even process what was happening. He was gone before their backup arrived, melting back into the darkness he had created. He had taken out 3 more of them, sowing chaos and fear, and had acquired a new weapon and a direct line to their communications. The hunters were quickly becoming the hunted. The man in charge of the mercenary unit was named Stryker. Reacher had pieced this together from the radio chatter. Stryker had a calm, controlled voice that never betrayed any emotion, but Reacher could sense the growing frustration behind the professionalism. After the blackout incident, Stryker pulled all his teams off the streets and back to the fortified compound. He was turtling up, consolidating his forces. He knew he was dealing with an opponent who was using the town against them. For Reacher, this was a victory. It gave him breathing room and confirmed that the compound was the only thing that mattered. Now, he had to figure out a way to get inside. He met with Maria again, in the pre-dawn gloom behind the diner. "They're scared," she said, handing him a container of hot coffee. "They're not strutting around anymore. They're watching the shadows. You did that." "Stryker has pulled everyone back to the compound," Reacher said. "That means he's protecting it, but it also means all his forces are in one place. What can you tell me about the trucks that come and go at night?" "They're refrigerated trucks," she said. "Big ones. They usually arrive around 2 a.m. One comes, one leaves. Always. The engine noise is very distinct." Refrigerated trucks. That didn't fit with a data center. Data centers generated massive heat. They needed cooling systems, not refrigeration. Unless the cargo itself needed to be kept cold. "Is there anything else?" Reacher asked. "The power," she said. "My brother was looking into it before he disappeared. The amount of electricity that compound uses is staggering. More than the rest of the town combined. He said they had to have their own dedicated substation. That piece fit. A massive server farm would need a colossal amount of power. But the refrigerated trucks were the anomaly. The two facts seemed to contradict each other. Reacher spent the day planning. Attacking the compound head-on was suicide. He was one man against nearly 30 professionals in a fortress. He had to be smarter. He had to use their own systems against them. The trucks were the key. They were the compound's one regular point of contact with the outside world. They were his way in. That night, he lay in wait on a low ridge overlooking the highway that led into Ocaso. The desert was cold now, the heat of the day a distant memory. Just before 2 a.m., he saw the headlights. A large, white, refrigerated truck, just as Maria had described. It rumbled past his position and headed towards the town. Reacher started to run. He moved parallel to the road, his long legs eating up the ground. He knew the truck would have to slow down as it approached the compound's main gate. He needed to be there when it did. He reached the perimeter fence a quarter of a mile from the gate, easily cutting a hole with a pair of wire cutters he'd taken from the hardware store. He slipped inside the perimeter and sprinted towards the access road, arriving just as the truck was braking for the gate. The back of the truck was his target. He leaped, his fingers catching the edge of the rear door's locking mechanism. He swung his body up, his boots finding a purchase on the bumper. He clung to the back of the truck as it rolled to a stop at the gatehouse. He heard voices, the exchange of pleasantries between the guards and the driver. Then the heavy steel gate began to slide open. The truck rolled forward into the lion's den. As soon as it was inside the compound and had cleared the gate, Reacher went to work. He pulled a small, powerful magnet from his pocket and attached it to the door, right over the exterior lock sensor, tricking it into thinking the door was still secure. Then, With practiced ease, he picked the mechanical lock on the handle. He eased the heavy door open just enough to slip inside, pulling it shut behind him. He was plunged into cold and darkness. A powerful cooling unit hummed above him. The air smelled of ozone and chilled metal. He used a small penlight to scan the interior. The truck was not carrying food or medical supplies. It was filled with rows and rows of server blades, stacked in sophisticated, liquid-cooled racks. This was the hardware. He had been right. It was a data center. But why transport the servers in and out in refrigerated trucks? It made no sense. You built a server farm and left it. You didn't swap out the hardware on a nightly basis. Unless the data was so sensitive that it could never be connected to an outside network. They weren't moving data over wires. They were moving the physical servers themselves, a completely air-gapped system. This was security on a level Reacher had never seen before. The truck backed up to a loading bay, the hiss of air brakes echoing in the confined space. Reacher found a hiding spot behind a stack of empty server racks. The rear doors opened, flooding the space with light. Mercenaries swarmed in, their movements efficient and practiced. They began unloading the new servers and loading a set of old ones from the bay. Reacher watched, waiting for his opportunity. The man overseeing the operation was Stryker. He was of average height, with a lean, wiry build and cold, intelligent eyes. He didn't shout or posture. He commanded respect with his quiet confidence. He stood with his arms crossed, watching his men work, his eyes missing nothing. This was the man Reacher had to beat. When the swap was nearly complete and the activity was at its most frenetic, Reacher made his move. He slipped out of the truck, mingling with the shadows and the machinery of the loading bay. No one noticed him. They were all focused on their task. He was just another shadow in a place full of them. He found a utility corridor and slipped inside. The interior of the building was cold, the air humming with the sound of thousands of servers and cooling fans. It was a maze of identical white hallways. Reacher moved through them, a ghost in the machine. He was looking for the command center, the brain of the operation. He found it on the second floor, a set of reinforced steel doors, guarded by 2 more mercenaries. He couldn't go through them, but he had seen the power conduits on the building's exterior. He knew where the power substation was, and he knew that a facility like this would have a backup control room for its power systems. He found it 1 floor below the command center. It was smaller, less guarded. He dealt with the single technician inside quickly and silently. The room was filled with monitors and control panels, all displaying the facility's power grid. Reacher looked at the main control board. The entire system was designed to be fail-safe, with multiple redundancies. But every system, no matter how perfect, has a flaw. And Reacher had a gift for finding flaws. He saw that the massive cooling system for the server halls was on a separate circuit from the servers themselves. A safety precaution, so that a power surge to the servers wouldn't knock out the cooling. He smiled. It was time to turn up the heat. He couldn't just cut the power to the cooling. That would trigger a dozen alarms. He had to be more subtle. He bypassed the thermostats, overriding the system and telling the industrial-sized chillers to stop working. Then, to mask his activity, he triggered a series of minor, harmless short circuits in other parts of the building's electrical grid, sending Stryker's men scurrying to deal with phantom problems. Then he waited. It didn't take long. A server farm of this magnitude generated an incredible amount of heat. Without the cooling system, the temperature in the server halls would rise exponentially. Within 10 minutes, the first alarms began to sound. Not security alarms, but system-wide temperature warnings. On the monitors in the power control room, Reacher watched the temperature gauges for the server halls climb into the red. Panic erupted over the radio network he was still monitoring. "Command, we have a critical heat warning in server Hall A. Hall B is overheating. We're approaching shutdown threshold." Stryker's voice cut through the noise, still calm, but with a new edge of urgency. "Get the technicians on it now. What's the status of the cooling system?" "It's not responding, sir. The system is offline." Reacher watched as Stryker diverted more and more of his men to deal with the technical crisis. The guards were pulled from their posts to help manually open ventilation shafts to try and save the multi-billion-dollar hardware that was slowly cooking. The command center was now their last priority. Reacher moved back up to the second floor. The two guards who had been standing watch at the steel doors were gone, presumably reassigned. Reacher slipped inside. The command center was a state-of-the-art affair, with a wall of monitors showing camera feeds from every corner of the compound. Only two men were left inside, a communications tech and Stryker himself, who was barking orders into his radio, his back to the door. Reacher took out the tech with a single, silent blow. Stryker spun around, his hand instinctively going for the pistol at his side, but Reacher was already on him. Stryker was no simple soldier. He was a fighter. He moved with a wiry, explosive grace, deflecting Reacher's initial attack and creating distance. He didn't try to match Reacher's strength. He used speed and precision, aiming a series of sharp kicks at Reacher's knees and ribs. They circled each other in the silent command room, two apex predators locked in a final, brutal dance. The only sounds were the slap of skin on skin and the grunts of exertion. Reacher absorbed the blows, his sheer size and pain tolerance allowing him to walk through attacks that would have crippled a normal man. He feinted a punch and, as Stryker dodged, Reacher shot a leg out, hooking Stryker's ankle and sending him off balance. Reacher surged forward, wrapping his arms around Stryker in a crushing bear hug, lifting him off the floor. Stryker slammed his elbows back into Reacher's head, but it was no use. Reacher squeezed, forcing the air from Stryker's lungs until the man's struggles weakened. He dropped Stryker to the floor, gasping for breath. "It's over," Reacher said. Stryker looked up, his cold eyes filled with grudging respect. "Who are you?" he wheezed. "Just a guy who was passing through," Reacher said. He used Stryker's computer to find out what Etheria Solutions was protecting. It was worse than he imagined. They weren't just storing data. They were a private intelligence agency, selling classified government secrets, corporate espionage, and personal information to the highest bidder. They had built this fortress in the desert to keep their stolen data physically secure, untouchable by any law enforcement agency in the world. The nightly truck swap was how their clients collected their purchases, on physical hard drives, completely untraceable. Reacher initiated the facility's emergency data purge protocol, a series of thermite charges that would incinerate every server blade in the building. As the final countdown began, he walked out of the command center, leaving Stryker tied up for the authorities. He found Maria and told her to call the state police and the FBI. He told her they would find evidence linking Etheria to her brother's disappearance. Then, as the first sirens wailed in the distance and the sky to the east began to glow with the first light of dawn, Jack Reacher walked out of Ocaso. He didn't look back. He had a new shirt from one of the mercenaries, a little cash from another, and an open road ahead of him. He was on his way to nowhere in particular, and that was exactly where he wanted to be. The last man standing had fallen, and Reacher, as always, just kept walking.